The diplomatic chamber aboard the neutral station, Haven's Rest, hummed with nervous energy, as representatives from 12 different species gathered for the most important trade negotiations in galactic history. Ambassador Kira of the Villani Empire adjusted her translator collar, her lavender skin shimmering with barely contained anxiety. This was her first major assignment since graduating from the diplomatic corps, and the weight of her species' expectations pressed heavily on her slender shoulders. The humans had requested this meeting specifically, claiming they had something revolutionary to offer the Galactic Trade Consortium. Most species viewed them with curiosity at best, condescension at worst. After all, they'd only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago, mere infants in the cosmic timeline. The Villani had been traversing the stars for over 3 millennia. Kira's violet eyes followed the human delegation as they entered. Unlike other species who arrived with grand entourages and ceremonial displays, the humans brought only 3 representatives. Their leader, Ambassador Tom Reed, appeared remarkably calm for someone representing such a young civilization. His weathered face spoke of experience, while his dark eyes held an intensity that made Kira shift uncomfortably in her seat. "Honored delegates," Tom began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber's acoustic systems, "we appreciate your willingness to hear our proposal. I know many of you question what a species like ours could possibly offer established galactic powers." Kira noticed how several delegates leaned back in their seats, tentacles, appendages, and various limbs crossing in universal gestures of skepticism. The insectoid Kix representative clicked dismissively, while the crystalline Luxian's forms dimmed with barely concealed boredom. "We humans," Tom continued, seemingly unbothered by the reception, "have something unique. Something that, according to our research, no other known species possesses to our degree." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "We have what you might call an unusual relationship with adversity." Kira's translator struggled with several concepts in that sentence, producing confused static. She wasn't alone. Murmurs of confusion rippled through the chamber in a dozen different languages. "Most civilizations," Tom explained, "develop technologies and social structures to minimize risk, eliminate danger, and create perfectly safe environments for their populations. This is logical, this is sensible." His smile was sharp. "Humans, however, have a tendency to seek out danger, to thrive in it, to create it when it doesn't exist naturally." The Kix delegate's antennae twitched with what Kira recognized as alarm. She found herself leaning forward, despite her better judgment. There was something magnetic about the way this human spoke, something that made her pulse quicken. "We call it many things," Tom said, beginning to pace in front of the massive holographic display behind him. "Extreme sports, adventure tourism, disaster response, military service, scientific exploration." Images flashed on the screen. Humans throwing themselves off cliffs with fabric wings, diving into crushing ocean depths, scaling impossible mountain faces, walking into radiation zones that would kill most species instantly. Kira's breath caught in her throat. The images were simultaneously horrifying and mesmerizing. Her people had eliminated such risks from their society eons ago. The very concept of deliberately seeking danger was so alien it made her head spin. "What we're proposing," Tom said, his voice dropping to an almost intimate tone that somehow reached every corner of the vast chamber, "is a trade arrangement unlike any in galactic history. You give us your most dangerous, most impossible, most suicidal tasks, the ones you can't or won't do yourselves." His smile widened. "And we'll do them for you." The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates shouted in confusion, alarm, and disbelief. But Kira sat, frozen, her large eyes fixed on the human ambassador, a strange warmth spreading through her chest as she began to understand the implications of what he was offering. The chamber's noise dampened as Tom raised his hand, but Kira barely noticed. Her mind raced through the implications of his words. The Villani Empire had dozens of projects stalled indefinitely because they were simply too dangerous to pursue. The neutron star mining operation in the Keth Nebula, the archaeological expedition to the plague worlds of the Outer Rim, The deep space reconnaissance missions beyond the galactic barrier where ships simply disappeared. I understand your skepticism, Tom said, his voice cutting through the gradually subsiding chatter. Let me be more specific. The holographic display shifted, showing a detailed star map. The Androxy Deeps. Every species here has lost ships attempting to explore that region. The gravitational anomalies alone have claimed over 300 vessels in the last century. A collective shudder ran through the assembled delegates. Kira's own grandmother had served on one of the Velani expeditions to the deeps, one that never returned. The region was considered cursed, forbidden, a cosmic graveyard that even the most advanced civilizations avoided. We'll map it for you, Tom stated simply. The Insectoid Kicks delegate's translator screeched with indignation. Impossible! Your species lacks the technological sophistication to survive what defeated our finest vessels. Tom's expression didn't change. Technology isn't everything. Sometimes what you need is the willingness to take calculated risks others won't consider. He gestured to another section of the display. The Voidwalker phenomena in the Tertian system. Your scientists have been trying to study them safely for 2 centuries. Yahira knew about the Voidwalkers, massive energy beings that existed in the space between dimensions, appearing randomly and causing devastating spatial distortions. Even approaching them was considered suicide. Her people's greatest physicists dreamed of studying them up close, but it was unthinkable to risk lives for mere scientific curiosity. We'll get you your data, Tom continued. Close-range scans, behavioral analysis, maybe even communication attempts. The casual way he discussed approaching cosmic horrors made Kira's hearts race. Both of them, the primary and secondary organs pumping in rapid succession. The Luxian representative's crystalline form pulsed with agitated light. You speak of these endeavors as if they're mere inconveniences. Do you not comprehend the mortality rates involved? For the first time, Tom's professional demeanor cracked slightly, revealing something that made Kira's breath hitch. It wasn't madness in his eyes, it was excitement. Pure, undiluted enthusiasm for the prospect of facing the impossible. Humans, he said, have a saying. Fortune favors the bold. We've built our entire civilization on the principle that sometimes the only way forward is through the thing that terrifies you most. He looked directly at Kira, and she felt heat creep up her neck. We've been doing it for millennia, long before we reached the stars. Every advancement, every breakthrough, every leap forward came from someone willing to risk everything for the possibility of something better. The holographic display shifted again, showing human historical footage. Kira watched in fascination as humans deliberately launched themselves into space in primitive metal cans, dove to ocean depths in vessels that looked like they'd collapse. Under pressure, walked on the surface of their homeworld's moon with technology that seemed impossibly crude by galactic standards. But here's what makes this truly beneficial for all of you, Tom said, his voice taking on that intimate quality. Again, that made Kira's skin tingle. We're not asking you to pay us in credits or resources or territory. He paused, letting the tension build. We want something far more valuable. The chamber fell completely silent. Even the station's ambient hum seemed to quiet in anticipation. We want to learn from you, Tom said softly. Every technique, every innovation, every piece of knowledge you've accumulated over your millennia among the stars. We'll trade our willingness to face your nightmares for your wisdom. Kira felt her mouth go dry. The proposition was breathtaking in its audacity. Humans offering to do the impossible in exchange for knowledge. It was so fundamentally different from every trade negotiation she'd studied that it didn't fit any existing diplomatic framework. But mostly, Tom added, his eyes once again finding Kira's across the chamber, we want the chance to prove that sometimes the youngest species at the table might just be exactly what everyone else needs. The warmth in Kira's chest spread outward, making her feel lightheaded. She gripped the edge of her seat, trying to process the magnitude of what she was hearing. This wasn't just a trade proposal. It was a complete reimagining of how civilizations could interact. The recess that followed Tom's initial presentation buzzed with frantic diplomatic activity. Delegates huddled in species-specific groups, their translators working overtime as heated discussions erupted across the chamber. Kira found herself standing alone near the massive viewport, staring out at the swirling nebula beyond while her mind struggled to process what she'd witnessed. The human proposal is fascinating, isn't it? Kira spun around, her heart skipping as she found Tom approaching, with 2 cups of what appeared to be some kind of steaming beverage. Up close, he was shorter than most Vellani males, but there was something about his presence that made the space around him feel charged with energy. "I brought you coffee," he said, offering her one of the cups. "I noticed you seemed, affected by our discussion." Kira's cheeks darkened to a deeper purple as she accepted the cup, her hands trembling slightly. "Affected?" Her voice came out higher than intended. Tom's smile was gentle but knowing. "Your species displays stress through skin pigmentation changes, according to our cultural briefings. You've been cycling through several interesting shades since I started talking." The casual way he mentioned studying her people's biology made Kira's breath catch. You researched us?" "We researched everyone," Tom replied, leaning against the viewport beside her. "It's what we do. When humans encounter something new, we study it obsessively until we understand it completely." He sipped his coffee, his eyes never leaving her face. "Though I have to admit, the Vellani were particularly interesting to research." Kira's grip tightened on her cup. "Why?" "Your people have the most extensive safety protocols in the galaxy," Tom explained. "Average lifespan of 800 standard years, achieved primarily through risk elimination. No dangerous occupations, no hazardous recreational activities, no unnecessary exposure to hostile environments." His expression grew thoughtful. "It's actually quite beautiful, in its own way. A civilization built entirely around preserving and nurturing life." The way he said it, with genuine admiration rather than mockery, made Kira's secondary heart flutter dangerously. You approve?" Tom turned to face her fully, and Kira suddenly became aware of how small the space between them had become. "I think it's remarkable," he said quietly. "But I also think it's left your people with some significant gaps." "Gaps?" Kira managed to whisper. "When was the last time a Vellani felt their heart race from anything other than medical distress?" Tom asked. "When did one of your people last experience the rush of adrenaline, the thrill of pushing boundaries, the satisfaction of overcoming something genuinely challenging?" Kira stared at him, her mind blank. The concepts he was describing had no equivalent in modern Vellani society. They'd been systematically eliminated as counterproductive to longevity and social stability. "That's why our proposal works," Tom continued, his voice dropping to that intimate register that made her skin feel electrified. "We'll handle the dangerous stuff, not just because we can, but because we need to. Risk and challenge aren't obstacles to us, they're nutrients. We require them to function properly as a species." "But people die," Kira protested weakly. "People—" "Anyway," Tom replied with a shrug that seemed impossibly casual given the topic. "The question is whether they die having truly lived." He gestured toward the viewport, where the nebula swirled in chaotic beauty. "Your people could live forever in perfect safety and never experience a fraction of what the universe has to offer." Kira felt something she'd never experienced before, a hollowness in her chest, as if Tom's words had illuminated an absence she'd never known existed. What would it feel like?" she heard herself ask. Tom's eyebrows rose slightly. What would what feel like? Taking risks, facing danger. The words felt foreign in her mouth, but also somehow right. "What does it feel like to choose uncertainty over safety?" For a moment, Tom's professional composure slipped entirely, revealing something raw and hungry in his expression. "It feels like being fully alive," he said softly. "Like every sense is heightened, every moment matters more because you might not get another one. It's terrifying and exhilarating and addictive in the best possible way." Kira's breath came faster as she tried to imagine it. Her skin had shifted to colors she didn't recognize, deep purples and blues that seemed to pulse with her racing hearts. Thiko. First time you push past what you thought were your limits, Tom continued, seemingly mesmerized by her color changes. The moment you discover you're capable of far more than you believed possible. There's nothing else like it in the universe. Kira started, then stopped, overwhelmed by sensations she had no names for. Tom stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. Would you like to find out what that feels like? Kira's cup slipped from her nerveless fingers, the coffee splattering across the station's polished floor as Tom's question hung in the air between them. Her skin had shifted to colors that her people's language didn't even have words for, deep crimsons mixed with electric blues that pulsed in rhythm with her thundering hearts. What are you? She stammered, her translator crackling with overload. Tom's expression immediately shifted to concern. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. He began to step back, but Kira's hand shot out instinctively, catching his wrist. The contact sent a shock through both of them. Kira had never touched an alien species before. It was considered inappropriate, potentially dangerous, certainly unprofessional. But Tom's skin was warm under her fingers, and she could feel his pulse beating steadier and stronger than seemed possible for someone who'd just made such an outrageous suggestion. You're serious, she whispered, studying his face. You're actually serious, Tom nodded slowly. The proposal I made in there, the official one, that's real. We'll take on your impossible missions, handle your dangerous situations, do the things your species can't or won't do. His free hand gestured vaguely toward the diplomatic chamber. But there's another aspect to this arrangement that I didn't mention to the full assembly. Kira's grip on his wrist tightened. Another aspect? Individual exchange programs, Tom explained, his voice taking on that intimate quality that made her feel like the rest of the universe had disappeared. We're not just offering to handle dangerous missions as a species-wide service. We're offering to teach interested individuals from your civilizations how to push their own boundaries. The concept was so alien to everything Kira had been taught that she felt dizzy. Teach us to be dangerous? Tom's smile was gentle, but edged with something that made her skin tingle. Teach you to be brave. There's a difference. He shifted slightly, his body angling toward hers in a way that made the space between them feel charged. Danger is just the context. What we're really offering to teach is how to discover who you really are when everything safe and familiar is stripped away. Kira struggled to find words. That's not something my people do. We have protocols against... I know, Tom said softly. Which is exactly why it would be so valuable. His eyes searched her face. When was the last time you surprised yourself, Kira? When did you last discover you were capable of something you never imagined? Hearing her name in his voice sent another shock through her system. The way he pronounced it, with slight emphasis on the second syllable, made it sound like something precious. I graduated top of my class at the Diplomatic Academy, she said weakly. By following established procedures and mastering known techniques, Tom replied. I'm talking about venturing into genuine unknown territory, about facing something that terrifies you and discovering you're stronger than your fear. Kira's breath came in short gasps. What would that even look like? Tom's expression grew thoughtful. For you, maybe something relatively simple at first, a zero-gravity EVA walk outside the station without a safety tether, or piloting a single-person craft through an asteroid field. Maybe even something as basic as trying human extreme sports. Each suggestion hit Kira like a physical blow. The thought of floating in open space with nothing but a thin suit between her and the vacuum made her feel nauseous. Navigating asteroid fields was something only emergency responders and military personnel did. And even then, with multiple backup systems. As for human extreme sports, she'd seen the footage of humans deliberately throwing themselves off cliffs and mountains, and it looked like elaborate suicide rituals. You're describing my worst nightmares, she whispered. I know, Tom replied, and the understanding in his voice was somehow worse than mockery would have been. That's exactly the point. Your worst nightmares are the gatekeepers to your greatest potential, but I could die. You could, Tom agreed with infuriating casualness. You could also discover that you're capable of far more than you ever imagined. That you're braver, stronger, more adaptable than your society has ever allowed you to be. Kira stared at him, her mind reeling. Everything he was suggesting went against millennia of Villani cultural evolution. Her people had worked tirelessly to eliminate unnecessary risk from their lives, to create a society where individuals could live long, productive, safe existences. Why? She asked finally. Why would anyone choose to live this way? Tom's expression grew distant for a moment, as if he was remembering something. Because the alternative isn't really living at all, he said quietly. It's just existing. Going through the motions of life without ever truly testing yourself against the universe. He turned back to her, and the intensity in his eyes made her take a half-step backward. Every human knows they're going to die. Eventually. We have shorter lifespans than most galactic species, more fragile bodies, fewer natural advantages. But we also know that the time we have is finite and precious, so we try to fill it with as much genuine experience as possible, even if that experience might kill you. Especially then, Tom said with a smile that was equal parts beautiful and terrifying. Because those are the moments when you're most alive. Kira felt something fundamental shifting inside her, like a structural wall she'd never known existed was beginning to crack. The proposition he was making, both the official diplomatic one and this personal challenge, represented everything her culture had spent centuries trying to avoid. And yet, standing here with her hand still wrapped around his wrist, feeling more awake and alert than she ever had in her life, she found herself wanting to say yes. I need to ask you something, Kira said, her voice barely above a whisper. The corridor outside the diplomatic chamber was empty now, most delegates having retired to their quarters to consider Tom's proposal. But she and the human ambassador remained by the viewport, neither willing to break the strange spell that had settled between them. Tom nodded, his expression patient but alert. Ask away. This personal exchange program you're describing is something your people do with every species. Kira's grip on his wrist had loosened, but not released entirely. The contact felt like an anchor in the storm of unfamiliar emotions churning through her system. Something flickered across Tom's face, a micro-expression that her diplomatic training helped her catch, despite its brevity. No, he admitted. In fact, you're the first individual from any species who's shown interest in pushing beyond their cultural safety parameters. The admission hit Kira like a physical blow. The first? But surely others have. The Kicks are too rigid in their social hierarchies, Tom explained. Individual risk-taking threatens their collective stability. The Luxians process reality too differently from us. What we consider thrilling, they experience as purely destructive chaos. The others, he shrugged. They see our proposal as a necessary service, like hiring contractors. They don't see it as an opportunity for personal growth. Kira stared at him, processing the implications. So when you asked if I wanted to know what taking risks felt like, I was making an offer I've never made to anyone outside my own species. Tom finished quietly. The weight of that admission settled over them both. Kira's skin had shifted to colors she was beginning to recognize as distinctly connected to Tom's. Presence. Deep purples shot through with silver that seemed to shimmer in the station's ambient lighting. Why me? She asked. Tom's free hand rose slowly, hovering near her face but not quite touching. Because you're the only person in that chamber who didn't immediately dismiss what we were offering. Everyone else heard dangerous missions and thought about logistics, risk management, cost-benefit analysis. His voice dropped. You heard it and something in your eyes lit up. Kira's breath caught. That's not... I wasn't... You were, Tom said gently. For just a moment, when I was describing the Androxy Deeps and the Void Walkers, you weren't thinking about how to manage the risks. You were thinking about what it would be like to see them yourself. The accusation was so accurate, it made Kira feel exposed, as if Tom had somehow glimpsed thoughts she hadn't even acknowledged to herself. That's impossible. My people don't think that way. You do, Tom replied with quiet certainty. Maybe not all Villani, but you specifically. You're different from your diplomatic profile, Kira. Different from what your cultural briefing suggested. Different. How? Tom's almost touching hand finally made contact, his fingers brushing against her cheek in a gesture so gentle it made her heart skip entirely. You're curious about the darkness, he said softly. About the spaces between stars where civilized people don't go. About what exists beyond the boundaries your society has drawn. Kira closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the truth of his words. Since childhood, she'd been fascinated by the forbidden zones marked on Villani's star charts. The radiation fields, the gravitational anomalies, the regions where ships disappeared and were never found. While other Villani children played games about exploring friendly worlds and establishing peaceful colonies, she'd dreamed about the places marked with warning symbols. I used to have nightmares, she whispered, her eyes still closed. But they weren't entirely unpleasant. Tom's thumb traced across her cheekbone. Tell me. Flying through the void Walker storms, standing on the surface of a neutron star, diving into a black hole and seeing what was on the other side. The words spilled out of her like a confession. I would wake up terrified, but also disappointed that it was just a dream. Those aren't nightmares, Tom said, his voice filled with something that sounded like recognition. Those are calling dreams. Kira's eyes snapped open. Calling dreams? Humans have them too. Dreams about places we've never been, experiences we've never had, but that feel more real than reality. Tom's expression was intense now, focused entirely on her. They're how our unconscious minds process the pull toward adventure, toward testing ourselves against the unknown. My therapists always said they were stress manifestations, symptoms of inadequate social integration. Tom's laugh was soft, but held an edge of something darker. Your therapists were wrong. Those dreams weren't symptoms of a problem. They were symptoms of potential. The word hung between them, loaded with implications that made Kira's skin shift to even more vivid colors. Potential for what? For becoming something extraordinary, Tom said. For being the kind of person who doesn't just exist within established boundaries, but helps expand them. His hand moved to cup her face more fully. For joining us. Joining you? Not officially, not as a permanent defection from your people, Tom clarified quickly. But as an exchange participant, someone willing to cross the line from safety into possibility. Kira felt as if she were standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into an abyss that was simultaneously terrifying and irresistibly appealing. Everything rational in her mind screamed warnings about cultural taboos, diplomatic protocols, personal safety, species loyalty. But something deeper, something that had been whispering in her dreams for years, urged her forward. What would it involve? She heard herself ask. Tom's smile was brilliant and dangerous. Everything you've ever been afraid to want. The next morning's diplomatic session was a carefully choreographed dance of interspecies politics. Each delegation presented formal responses to the human proposal, couched in the elaborate diplomatic language that Kira had spent years learning to navigate. The Kicks raised concerns about insurance and liability. The Luxians questioned the long-term stability of arrangements built on what they termed chaos-seeking behavior. The other species offered variations on the same theme. Cautious interest mixed with fundamental skepticism about human reliability. Kira sat with the Villani delegation, her official diplomatic mask perfectly in place, while her mind churned with the memories of her conversation with Tom. She'd barely slept, her dreams filled with visions of herself floating in open space, piloting ships through dangerous territories, standing at the edge of cosmic phenomena that no Villani had ever observed up close. When her turn came to present the Villani Empire's official response, she stood on unsteady legs and activated her prepared statement. The Villani Empire acknowledges the unique nature of the human proposal, she began, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. We have several deep space projects that have been indefinitely postponed due to safety concerns. The possibility of outsourcing these endeavors to a species with different risk tolerances has significant merit. She could feel Tom's eyes on her from across the chamber, but she didn't dare look in his direction. Not yet, however, she continued, following her prepared script. We have concerns about the proposed knowledge-sharing aspects of the arrangement. The Vellani Empire has spent millennia developing technologies and techniques specifically designed to minimize risk and maximize safety. Sharing these with a species that appears to actively seek out danger raises obvious concerns. Several delegates nodded approvingly. This was the kind of response they understood. Cautious, protocol-driven, focused on protecting existing advantages. That said, Kira added, and this time she did look at Tom, meeting his eyes across the chamber. The Vellani Empire is prepared to discuss limited pilot programs. The change in Tom's expression was subtle but unmistakable. He'd caught the deviation from standard diplomatic language, the slight emphasis on limited pilot programs that could be interpreted in multiple ways. What kind of pilot programs? Asked the session moderator, a ethereal being whose species Kira could never remember the name of. This was the moment, the point of no return. Kira took a breath that felt like it might be her last as a conventional Vellani diplomat. Individual exchange programs, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. Selected volunteers from our species working directly with human counterparts on specific projects. Close collaboration to better understand human methods and perspectives. The chamber erupted in surprised murmurs. This wasn't the kind of proposal anyone had expected from the notoriously cautious Vellani. But Tom's smile was brilliant. After the session ended, Kira found herself once again alone with the human ambassador, this time in a smaller conference room reserved for bilateral discussions. Her hands shook as she poured herself water from the refreshment station. That was unexpected, Tom said, settling into a chair across from her. I'm sure my superiors will have opinions about my deviation from the prepared statement, Kira admitted. Are you concerned about their reactions? Kira considered the question. 24 hours ago, the answer would have been an unqualified yes. The approval of her superiors, the maintenance of her career trajectory, the preservation of her standing within Vellani society, these had been her primary concerns. Now they felt strangely distant. I'm more concerned about the opportunity I might lose if I don't take it, she said finally. Tom leaned forward, his expression serious. Kira, I need you to understand what you'd be signing up for. This isn't a diplomatic simulation or a controlled cultural exchange. If you volunteer for this program, you'll be putting yourself in genuinely dangerous situations with no guarantee of safety. I know. Your life expectancy will drop significantly. You'll experience fear, physical discomfort, possibly injury. You'll be asked to do things that every instinct your species has developed will tell you to avoid. I know, Kira repeated, her voice steady. You could die. For a moment they stared at each other across the small table. Then Kira smiled, an expression that felt foreign on her face, but somehow right. I could also live, she said quietly. Really? Live, for the first time in my existence. Tom was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. The first assignment would be relatively simple, he said finally. A reconnaissance mission to map the outer edges of the Kepler anomaly. 2-person crew, minimal backup, expected duration of 6 weeks. Kira's pulse quickened. The Kepler anomaly was a region of space where the laws of physics seemed to operate differently. Ships that entered it sometimes returned with impossible readings, sometimes didn't return at all. It had been on the Vellani Empire's indefinite postponement list for over 50 years. When would we leave? She asked. Tom's eyebrows rose slightly. We? You said 2-person crew. I did. Tom's expression grew thoughtful. I was planning to handle this mission personally, but I hadn't necessarily assumed you'd want to. I want to, Kira interrupted, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. If I'm going to do this, I want to do it properly. No training. Wheels, no safety protocols, no half measures. Tom stared at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, surprise giving way to recognition, then to something that looked almost like pride. In that case, he said slowly. "We leave in 72 hours." Kira stood in the docking bay of Haven's Rest, staring at the ship that would carry her further from safety than any Villani had traveled in living memory. The Wanderer looked nothing like the sleek, heavily shielded vessels her people preferred. It was smaller, more angular, with visible weapon hardpoints and sensor arrays that seemed designed for active rather than passive scanning. "Having second thoughts?" Tom asked, approaching with 2 equipment bags slung over his shoulders. Kira turned to face him, taking in his appearance. Gone was the diplomatic formal wear, replaced by practical clothing and gear that made him look less like an ambassador and more like, well, like someone who spent his time deliberately flying into cosmic nightmares. "Third and fourth thoughts," she admitted, "but not the kind that are going to stop me." Tom set down the bags and moved closer, his expression serious. "Before we launch, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "Go ahead." "Why are you really doing this?" Tom asked. "Not the diplomatic reasons, not the cultural exchange justifications. Why are you, Kira, personally choosing to leave everything safe and familiar behind?" Kira looked past him, toward the viewport, showing the stars beyond the station. The question deserved an honest answer, even if that answer revealed things about herself she'd never acknowledged before. "Because I've spent my entire life being exactly what my society expected me to be," she said finally. "Perfect grades, perfect diplomatic training, perfect adherence to every safety protocol and cultural norm." She turned back to Tom. "And I've been slowly dying inside." Tom nodded, as if he'd expected something like that. "When you described taking risks, facing the unknown, testing yourself against the universe," Kira continued, "it was the first time in my life that someone offered me the chance to find out who I really am when everything familiar is stripped away. And you're willing to risk your life for that chance?" Kira's laugh surprised them both. "Tom, I'm not risking my life. I'm finally trying to live it." Something shifted in Tom's expression, a warmth that made her skin tingle with colors she was still learning to recognize. "In that case," he said, extending his hand toward her, "let's go find out what you're really made of." Kira took his hand without hesitation, feeling the calluses on his palm that spoke of a lifetime spent handling dangerous equipment, making difficult decisions, choosing the hard path because it led somewhere worth going. As they walked toward the Wanderer together, Kira felt something she'd never experienced before, a sense of moving toward her authentic self rather than away from it. Behind them, the safety and certainty of civilized space waited. Ahead lay the Kepler anomaly, with its impossible physics and unknown dangers. For the first time in her life, the choice was easy. "Tom," she said as they reached the ship's boarding ramp. "Yeah?" "When we get back from this mission, assuming we survive it, I want to propose something to both our governments." Tom paused, his hand on the ramp controls. "What kind of proposal?" Kira's skin shifted to colors that spoke of determination mixed with anticipation. "A permanent human Villani joint exploration program, not just for impossible missions, but for individuals from my species who want to learn what it means to truly live." Tom's smile was radiant. "I think that could be arranged." As the boarding ramp sealed behind them, and the Wanderer prepared for launch, Kira strapped herself into the co-pilot's seat and felt her heart racing with something she'd never experienced before. Not fear of the unknown, but excitement about it. Through the viewport, the Kepler anomaly waited like a question mark written across the stars. In a few hours, she would have answers to mysteries her people had wondered about for decades. She might also die in the attempt. But as the ship's engines powered up and they pulled away from the station's docking bay, Kira realized that for the first time in her existence, she wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of not truly living. "Ready?" Tom asked, his hands moving confidently over the navigation controls. Kira looked out at the swirling colors of the Kepler anomaly in the distance, then at the human beside her, who had somehow seen past centuries of cultural conditioning to the person she'd always been meant to be. "Ready," she said, and meant it completely. As the Wanderer accelerated toward the edge of known space, carrying the first Villani in history to voluntarily seek out danger instead of avoiding it, Kira felt something fundamental click into place, inside her chest. This wasn't just a diplomatic mission or a cultural exchange. This was the beginning of everything she'd been unconsciously preparing for her entire life. The stars ahead looked different now, not like distant, safely observed objects, but like destinations waiting to be explored. And beside her sat a human who understood that the most important discoveries weren't made in laboratories or conference rooms, but in the spaces between heartbeats, when you chose courage over safety and found out what you were truly capable of. The Kepler anomaly grew larger in their viewport, its impossible geometries dancing with colors that had no names in any known language. Soon, they would enter that chaos together and emerge either with answers that would change both their civilizations, or not at all. Either way, Kira thought, as she reached over to squeeze Tom's hand one more time before they crossed the threshold into the unknown, she would finally know what it felt like to be completely, authentically, dangerously alive.